Sadika Katari, and I am the social media director here at Magnify Wellness.
Hi, Vedika. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, so go ahead and introduce yourself for me.
Thank you. Happy to do that. I am Dr. Taisha Caldwell-Harvey. I am the founder of the Black Girl Doctor and a licensed psychologist. Black Girl Doctor is a mental health practice, a virtual mental health practice, and we specialize in supporting professional women.
So, how did you get into your business?
Yeah, so I guess it's a little bit of a long story, but in short, I'll say that after completing my psychology degree, I actually took a position. Sorry, after completing my psychology degree, I was working in college counseling. So I worked actually at UC Irvine in California. I forgot to ask, where are you located?
I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm actually wearing my UCI sweatshirt right now.
Nice. Okay, so there's a connection there. But yeah, I'm originally from the Bay Area, California Bay Area, and then I went and lived all over a bit for school. So I went to Spelman College in Atlanta for undergrad, and then I did my graduate work at Southern Illinois University, which is it's in the rural Midwest. So it's about 2 hours south of St. Louis. And then I was there for 4 years, and then I went to UC Irvine for my pre and postdoctoral fellowship programming, which is what you do when you get a psych degree after you finish kind of the on campus type work. Um, so I did that. And then I stayed there for another year working in the counseling center as staff. And I really, at that time, was feeling a little burnt out from the clinical work. Around that time, college counseling has gotten so intense over the years, and students are struggling. And I was feeling a little burnt out from that work, and I wanted to use my skills to develop programming. And so I was like, I was doing the one-on-one therapy work, but I really wanted to help build programs that could support like a broader range of students in their mental health and well-being. And so I ended up accepting a position at the University of California President's Office, which is up in Oakland, California. And that is the central hub for all 10 UC campuses. And I took a position managing a mental health grant where we had received funds from the state to develop mental health innovations and new programming and technology to better support students. So I spent 7 years there, like getting to research best practices and look at the new tech that was coming out of mental health and propose ideas that I thought would be really effective for students, for college students. And that was super exciting and fun and intense. And I learned so much. And then as I was doing that over the years, I really started missing clinical work though. And so I was like, I love doing this, and now I miss seeing people one-on-one. So I started my virtual practice in the evenings where I was doing virtual therapy with professional women. And then as I was doing both, I honestly just felt in my heart that I was being pulled to do that more full time and to develop the practice. And so eventually I resigned from the UC position and then went full time entrepreneur and started my practice and then expanded it into a group practice. So now we're a team of 6 psychologists and then some program staff. And we do therapy in groups, and then we do corporate wellness. So we go into organizations and do workshops so that way the workplace is a healthier space for employees.
That's so amazing. So, do you ever feel stigmatized working in a field that hasn't been as prevalent in the past generations?
Yeah, I would say not really. I think working in mental health feels a little bit different to me than I still feel the stigma around talking about mental health and even like getting therapy, even like maybe my friends and family are kind of like, what is it that you do? Or they might be uncomfortable asking me about referrals for therapists. But in terms of me working in it, I don't really feel stigma. But I do notice a huge shift that more people are open to getting therapy and talking about like well-being and prioritizing their well-being. I feel like, the younger generation now is like, I don't want to be burnt out like my aunts and uncles and parents and everybody else. And I love that energy. So I think that that is a positive shift.
That's great. So, the younger generation does still feel some type of burnout and imposter syndrome. So we're going to get into those kinds of questions now. So let's start with you personally. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome and how did it change you as a person if you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one, I'll just start by saying imposter syndrome really is like this feeling that you get where you start, all of a sudden, you start doubting your capabilities and your talents and your smarts and your innate maybe value and worth in certain spaces, and start feeling, get the sense of like, I hope nobody finds out that somebody let me in here, right? And I
Mhm.
get kicked out. Whether that's school or let's say you get, I don't know, into some organization or club or something, and you just start feeling like maybe you don't belong there. So that's kind of what imposter syndrome is. And I have definitely felt that before. I think the first time I remember feeling that is when I started my undergrad education. So I mentioned, so I grew up in the Bay Area, San Jose, California. I went to what I now know are poor performing high school, which at the time just it was just school, and so I felt like that was normal. Everyone goes to high school. I did well, and that's that. But when I went to college, so I went to Spelman College, which is a private historically Black university, and it is all women, and it is highly competitive, and I all of a sudden was surrounded with a bunch of really, really smart women. And they were, they had a lot of them had been to private school or just schools that were better ranked. And so I suddenly realized how much or how different my education was than a lot of maybe the country. And so I was like, oh, how is it possible that you could have a higher than a 4.0 GPA? Like, I didn't know that was a thing, but I was like, what's AP classes? What is this? And I think about it now, like I just didn't know these things were possible. And so I wasn't exposed to those things. I felt like a lot of my peers had read more books than I had read, different genres. I felt like they were more advanced just in their critical thinking and certain areas. And I panicked. My freshman year, I remember feeling this, why did they let me in here?
Mhm.
How did this, like, how? And should I just leave now before they find out that they have made a huge mistake? And I get kicked out. um, and I laugh now, but it was actually very terrifying. And I remember feeling like I'm going to have to work so much harder than everybody else. I don't know if I can do this. I'm not as smart as everybody. And yeah, I can't remember the second part of that question, but that was the first time I remember feeling that.
Yeah, so how did it change you as a person, like now when you look back at it?
Yeah. So I was forced in that moment. So I had not heard of the term imposter syndrome at the time. So I was just having this experience and feeling a lot of doubt. And what helped me at the time was I was able to call on like my mom. I definitely remember calling my mom, sobbing, like, I can't do this, even though I was so ready to leave home. And I was like, bye. um, and her just reminding me of like my innate value and that I was smart and talented and all of these things. And it's interesting now because now being a psychologist, I study things like this, like why do people feel imposter syndrome and how does it impact you and how do you combat it? And I don't believe that my mom like obviously doesn't like didn't know the research behind like imposter syndrome or even to name it that or what it was. But some of the things that she did for me are actually like great solutions for how you move beyond it, right? And so one is just I think the way so one I will say so I will just say in terms of me it changing me, it forced me to like either combat it or like kind of give into it, right? And so it's like it's pretty strong, so it's almost like you have a decision to make. Like you're either going to say, yep, let me bow out gracefully before this turns into a disaster, or if you decide to persist, then you eventually prove to yourself that that wasn't actually true, right? And that is a painful like little journey to get there sometimes, but that's what you're doing. Like if you decide to stay and kind of just feel uncomfortable and like have those doubt feelings but continue to work towards what you're working at, when you get to the other side, you prove to yourself that you were wrong. And so I think that it was a powerful exercise for me to have someone to motive to push me to not quit, help me prove to myself that like, oh, I got over that. And so the next time it comes up, you remember like, oh, I experienced that before. I got through it. It's okay. I could probably do it again. Like at least there's some questioning. Like you're never gonna be as sure that you're an imposter the second time it happens to you as you were the first time. And so I think it totally shifted my ability to believe in myself. So I don't want to call it a good thing, but it's something that good came out of it.
Yeah, I totally understand. So you said that you did this research on imposter syndrome and you helped people identify it within themselves. So how do you identify imposter syndrome within another person? Like say
Mm,
you're talking to your friends, they're feeling burnt out. How would you like identify that and then how would you help them?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I think imposter syndrome is really one of those things that's very personal to the person. And it usually isn't something that I don't that people from the outside see readily, like your friends don't necessarily see that unless you talk about it, because it's literally a fear that you're walking around with, and when you're trying to hide it, right? So you're like, the whole point of it is like, I hope nobody finds out. I hope nobody finds out. So you feel like you're pretending, right? And you're just going through the motions. And so, but I do think that when you have friends that are struggling, or if you're talking about like, maybe I should just quit, maybe I'm going to drop out of school, maybe this isn't for me, that some questions you can start asking is instead of just saying, oh no, like you can do it, to ask why, like, and really push people on respond, like helping them even talk through like, well, why do you feel like that? What is the evidence? Um, and that's always a really good question that I ask, even when I'm working with my therapy clients. And, when they say something to me, when I meet somebody, I don't know if you're smart or not, right? Like, I just met you. but my goal as a therapist is to uncover who you are, identify your strengths and your talents and your values and what you want to do with your life, and help you use all of that to like move in the direction you're trying to go. And so I'm genuinely asking, like, oh, well, why do you think you can't do this? Like, well, what happened? Like, what are the things that, what is the data? Like, if you had to prove it to me, like a scientific study, like, what is your evidence to support that you aren't capable of this? And that really pushes people a lot of the times to think about what triggered the fear. And most times, people don't have good evidence. But I think what it does do is that I'm never it because the point isn't to be positive and always say you can do something, because it's possible, right, that we get in situations where we are unprepared. That is very possible. And so it's not about being positive, it's about being accurate with yourself, and then not making a life altering decision with untrue facts, right? So like, if you're saying I'm incompetent, I can't do this, and then you decide to not do it and drop out of school, when the reality is you're very capable and very smart and you can do it and succeed, that's a bad decision, right? But if the reality is that your strength in like learning does not align with the major you chose, right, and this is a struggle for you and you don't want to struggle that way, and there are other talents that are better aligned with your abilities, like you need to know that too, but that truth lets you make a good decision, which might mean, oh, it's not that I'm intelligent, it's that maybe I'm not in the right area for myself, like let me adjust. So it lets you ask the right questions.
Oh, okay. I learned a lot from that. So thank you. So my next question is, how does imposter syndrome affect students, like high school, college students, or people in the workplace? And what bigger problems might it lead to in the future if you don't like face your fears?
Yeah. So I would say what problems it leads to, or I guess, well, sorry, can you repeat the question? The first part of the question.
So how does imposter syndrome affect the students and the people working, and what bigger problems might it lead to in the future?
Yeah. So problems it causes, I would say the self doubt will cause you to underperform. So when you have heightened stress and anxiety around your ability, you're basically, and then what happens, like that energy that your body is exerting to, just sit with and manage the anxiety that you have, it is taking away from your like energy, your focus from actually doing the task. And so there in psychology, you can even think about it like test anxiety. So if you're going to go in for an exam, if you're freaking out about the test, you're going to underperform, right? And so like obviously some level, there's a healthy level of anxiety that we have. And you can think about stress and anxiety on like a bell curve. And so ideally you want to have just enough stress that your performance is at its peak, right? Because if you have no stress, you're like, I don't care. I won't study. I'll just go in, blah, blah, blah. And you'll perform. You actually will, you can underperform that way too. But when your stress is high, where you kind of like I might not get this done. Let me hurry up and finish. Let me focus. Like that is when you actually perform your best, like scientifically. And then, but when the anxiety goes even higher, your performance actually starts to decline. And just if you think about it in that way, it's like, yes, you want to feel some sense of urgency or pressure around performing so you do well, but you don't want it to cripple you. And I think that's what happens with imposter syndrome. It cripples us. And then I think sometimes in students, and particularly students of color, I think it will push you to not pursue opportunities that you are more than deserving of. Right. And so I think that is a shame and how it turns into like a societal, systemic, social injustice type issue. Because when you have, groups of students that um, students of color who are more likely to doubt themselves and then not pursue opportunities, then you end up with less of those students in the opportunities and then less of those students benefiting from what those opportunities like provide. And some of that, I don't want to allude to that being like something internal among students of color, like we're just all naturally like less confident in ourselves. A lot of that comes from stereotypes in society. So we're all aware of what people say about like our people, our like our culture. And there is some level of anxiety about not wanting to realize negative stereotypes about your community. Again, which causes undue stress, which actually makes you underperform and then more likely to like fall into those stereotypes. And so there's actually a lot of research around how what we call stereotype threat impacts performance. But simply just knowing like what imposter syndrome is helpful, because when you first experience it, you're just like, it just feels real. Like it's just, the fact is I'm scared and they're going to find out. But then when you know that like, hey, there's this thing that sometimes happens when you get in new situations and, you feel out of place where you might start feeling like an imposter. And then you're like, oh, that's what that is. Right. And so you can name it, you can look it up, and then it helps to weaken the strength of like what it feels like, right? It doesn't make it go away, but knowing that it isn't just like your reality and that it's a thing that happens to people helps you say, okay, so maybe it's not true, right? Or like maybe I can do something about this if this is a thing that other people experience, not just me.
So, some of our youth also say that imposter syndrome is triggered by setting expectations exceedingly high. How can we work on setting expectations that will not cause burnout, but still like challenge ourselves to reach a goal that we want?
Yeah. Like you want to be excellent, right? You want to be excellent, you want to be amazing, but you don't want to burn out. And I think that is such an important question. I think that I love that young people are asking that question, because literally the work I do now in working with, working professionals is to help them figure out how to stop competing, like how to stop having their desire for success compete with their ability to experience joy. Like that is the work that I do. And I don't want this next generation to be there struggling with that, because it's something that you want to embrace as part of your journey. And those two things can coexist. You can be amazing and well, like, right, and healthy. Um, so one of the things I would say, just in terms of, you know, combating it, I think one of the things that triggers this sometimes is perfectionism. And so a lot of super ambitious, talented students are perfectionists. And the idea behind perfectionism is that things have to be perfect. And I think most folks that are high achieving see perfectionism as a good thing. And it's like, it means I strive to be the best. Like, what's wrong with that? Right? Like, most of our parents are like, be the best. And there is nothing wrong with striving to be great. But perfectionism, by definition, means that there is zero error and there's no margin of error in perfectionism, right? Like, it's either perfect or it's a failure. Those are your options, right? And when you set yourself up for those being your options, 100% in terms of your life and your goals as you pursue, you are guaranteeing you will see yourself as a failure, right? Because perfectionism doesn't actually exist, right? So there is, and it's like it's one of those things where it sounds good on the surface, but the implications below the surface are pretty significant and they're just inaccurate. And so if you can't literally be perfect all the time, but your scale is perfect or failure, like, you're literally always a failure. And then I find, a lot of people then constantly, then you punish yourself, like, oh, why couldn't you just be perfect? Like, just do it better next time. And then you never celebrate yourself, right? And it's like, um, it's either, and so it's this constant. So what you want to do is you want to set yourself up with realistic expectations and what like excellence actually looks like. Um, and I like to say, like, my definition, my equation for success is hard work plus joy. And without joy, you don't have you don't actually have success, right? So when you think about like what is a life that is joyless, where all you do is strive towards perfectionism all the time and work really, really hard. Like, I don't think that's kind of what we want, right? But if it's possible to be able to work really hard, get the things that you want, um, and be happy while you're doing it, like, that's a good plan, right? And it requires you to sacrifice something sometimes. So like, you can't do it all. We can't like read every book 5 times and like enjoy our family. Like, you actually need to like read the book one last time and enjoy your family so you can have all of that. Like, and so it's honestly about prioritizing and making sure that every day of your life you actually do something that makes you smile and laugh, even if it means you don't do something like academic or work wise. And it doesn't have to be something big. Like, you don't have to like, I don't know, go to a party every day, right? But you do, when someone tells you something really, really funny and you laugh and you get this like burst of emotion and you're just like, oh, that's so funny. That burst of emotion, that feeling, that is joy. It's something that you're capable of despite any circumstance that you're in. So if you're grieving, if you're in pain, if you have depression, if you have stress, like, you can actually still strive for moments of joy where you get that burst of energy, right? That burst of positive emotion. And what science tells us is that those little moments compound over time, like interest in the bank, and lead to a happier life. And so you don't have to like chase happiness all day, every day, which is also kind of idealistic, right? But what you can do is say, I'm going to experience joy at least a little every single day, and then see what that does to you. Like, when you do that, and then you'll be able to look back on the week and be like, how was my week? And you're going to be more likely to be like, it was a pretty good week, than if you're not intentional about doing that.
So that's one way that we can recover from this imposter syndrome that we're facing. Are there any other ways or solutions that will help us like slowly build towards not feeling this?
Yes, I'll say one, give up the idea of perfection and just strive to be good, be great, okay, but not perfect. I would say also another thing, well, so that I will say, and make sure that you chase joy every day. And then a third thing I will say is to really focus or just understand the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. I don't know if you've heard that before, but there's some great articles and YouTube videos online if you like Google growth mindset. But basically, it's the idea that, so there's two ways to think about your abilities, right, in your brain. When people have a fixed mindset, like it's when we believe that you are born with a certain amount of smarts and talents and skills, and that's what you got. And you need to maximize it and use it to the best of your ability to get what you want in a life, right? And then there's another way that you can think about your brain. And it is a growth mindset. And that is when people believe that you have, a certain amount of talents and skills, but that you can grow it and expand it. And that's actually true of our brain. We can create new connections and pathways in our brain by learning. When you think about our traits that we're born with, they're not necessarily, it's not like you have like a marble and different size marbles of stuff. It's like you have rubber bands and you have different size rubber bands, but they can all be stretched to their capacity. And so when you know that you can grow, that can really combat this belief that like you don't have it, because it's like if you don't have it today, but you know that you can grow your brain, then it gives you a fighting chance to work on it and get better. And that's actually very true.
Okay, so since we're coming to an end to this interview, I have two more questions. The first one is, what resources have you used or provided to help recover from imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, therapy is very important. So I think that young people in particular should not be afraid to connect with a therapist. If you're in school and you have access, free therapy, it's the only time it's going to be free, probably. So you take advantage of it. Um, particularly colleges and universities, usually have really talented therapists that work there. And so that quality of care outside of when you graduate is expensive. And so take advantage of whatever resources you have. I would also say to try to get comfortable talking about what it is that you're feeling. Literally just not living in secrecy makes a huge difference. And then you're able to connect with other people and share experiences, and it will help you process what's happening instead of trying to figure it all out on your own. And I would also say things that additionally, mentorship is huge. And so if you don't have a mentor, finding a mentor is really important, and having someone that you can call when you're struggling, especially when you're pursuing a career goal, to be able to say, this is what's happening for me. Is this normal? Am I a mess? Right. And to have somebody to help to guide you and to help you kind of map out what the next 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years looks like for you in your career, is crucial. I think I couldn't stress enough how essential it is to have a mentor.
That's great. So, do you have any closing advice for our audience? It can be about imposter syndrome or really anything you want to let everyone know.
Yeah, I will say I want to highlight the importance of chasing joy. I think I'll quote Dr. Maya Angelou, who has always, who always reminded us that, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that same advice can be applied to ourselves. Like, we're going to forget what we did. We're going to forget the things on our to-do list. You're going to forget the paper that you wrote. You're going to forget like the stress you had when you were trying to meet a deadline for a project, but you're not going to forget how you felt at the end of like each week. You don't forget how you felt at the end of 2020. Like, you may not know what happened in January, but you know if the year was crappy or not. And so really shifting your goals and what you strive toward to what you're striving towards to be in alignment with what you want to feel is much more important than striving towards what you want to accomplish. So to say like, what is it that I need to accomplish that's going to leave me feeling, successful and joyful at the end of the week or at the end of this academic year, right? And to be able to then work towards that is a much better way to plan than to say, how can I get the most stuff done? And I think if you can make that shift early on, it seems scary because it's like, but what if I don't like get accomplished enough? But what all the research says is that you will actually accomplish more if you set your sights on focusing on your well-being, than you will if you're focused on just kind of checking things off the list.
That's so great. Thank you so much for coming out and speaking with me today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, I hope you can chase some joy today.
Thank you.